If a NATO nation did provide escort to international shipping going in and out of Ukraine, that sort of escalation could become very dangerous indeed. Should Russia attack a NATO ship, we're then into the game of Article 5 and the conflict expanding. Well, last night we saw Russia once again strike Ukrainian ports on the Black Sea coast. And this is after Russia declaring that any ship that's going into Ukrainian ports would be seen as ones that are carrying military equipment. And then Ukraine's response yesterday, turning around saying that any ships that they see going towards Russian or illegally occupied ports on the Ukrainian coast, illegally occupied by Russia, would be seen as legitimate military targets. And it's a tit for tat. The second night of missile attacks against the Ukrainian port saw some 7 cruise missiles, 4 anti-ship missiles, and 19 Shahad 136 or 131 Kamikaze drones. These Iranian drones target port infrastructure and the headquarters for Odessa port, destroying that. The attacks last night, Ukraine claimed it shot down 18 of the missiles that were incoming, but some of the missiles, especially the anti-ship missiles, skim very tight to the surface of the water before rising up to attack their target, and are extremely difficult for the Ukrainian air defense forces to try and defend against. This is the start of probably a continued campaign of attacking Ukrainian port infrastructure to try and put pressure not just on Ukraine, but to put pressure on the EU and the international community to ease some of the sanctions against Russia, and to try and bring a greater global pressure on those countries that are supporting Ukraine to reduce their support. The threats against different cargo ships are almost certainly a war of words. I don't think the Russians would actively try and target Ukrainian cargo ships. And I don't think Ukraine would actively try and target Russian cargo ships. They will target Russian warships. And Ukraine has been supplied with quite a large number of anti-ship missiles and anti-ship technology by the West, and in particular by the UK. But it seems that Ukraine is also developing its own anti-ship capability with these uncrewed, unmanned surface vehicles or surface vessels that they have been trying more unsuccessfully than successfully to drive into the Russian-occupied ports. And therefore, it is very dangerous for merchant shipping going in and out without proper escorts. There have been some talk that Turkey might provide escorts. That has not been confirmed. If we get NATO navies coming and escorting ships in and out, that could be seen as a major escalation. If a NATO nation did provide escort to international shipping going in and out of Ukraine, that sort of escalation could become very dangerous indeed. Should Russia attack a NATO ship, we're then into the game of Article 5 and the conflict expanding. Russia wouldn't want to do that. The reports that we had of Russia carrying out live fire exercises at sea yesterday are in 2 ways. One's a demonstration that they are trying to suggest that their normal military and naval activities continue, but that's part of what would be routine exercises expected anyway. However, they will have done it very nervously and made sure that they've been very careful to stay outside missile and potential surface drone range. 2 of the missiles that Russia is using to try and attack the Ukrainian ports and elsewhere are very difficult. There are adaptations of the air defense missiles, the S-300s, which are a ballistic missile. Ballistic missiles will go up very high and come down very fast. And in reality, the only air defense system that the Ukrainians have got that's able to interdict them is the Patriot. And they don't have many Patriots, and I'm not sure whether there are any deployed down in the coastal ports. And then the other missiles that exist are hypersonic anti-ship missiles that the Russians have that can fly over 3,000 kilometers an hour, about 10 to 15 meters above sea level, which means that it's very difficult for radars to identify them and pick them up. with a background clatter that there is when you get looking out to sea. And then they will pop up at the last moment before diving in on their targets. Again, you have to have very proactive and reactive air defense systems to be able to pick those sorts of missiles up very quickly. Very hard to detect, very hard to shoot down, but the Russians don't have that many of them. What options Ukraine have got at the moment is to continue some of their exports via rail, road, and the canal networks across Europe. And whilst a number of European countries are protecting their own grain exports and won't allow the import of Ukrainian grain, they will allow it to go through their different countries. This is big business, and it's important for Ukraine that it can get its foodstuffs out across the world. But the land routes and the canal routes don't match what there is in the sea routes. So we're going to see a bit of a standoff. Ukraine and the world can probably last a couple of months until this is renegotiated, and we'll see what happens here. But we're already seeing an intensification of what's going on around in the Black Sea. We saw the sinking of the Russian warship, the Moskva, last year. We've seen an increasing number of unmanned sea vehicles attacking Sevastopol port and trying to sink further Russian ships. We've seen the attack on the Kerch Bridge. So I think the occupied coast is going to become much more of a target as the Ukrainian counteroffensive continues to move forward very slowly. Russia simply knows that trying to export grain and oil and other food products by road and by canal will not meet the global demand. There have been 33 million tons exported from Ukrainian ports since the grain deal was brokered by Turkey and the United Nations in July of 2022. The number of trucks, the number of barges, the number of rail carriages that would be needed to carry that sort of volume of food that's critical to the world food market would be impossible for the Ukrainians to be able to provide.